In 1987, an event occurred that no one could have predicted. A father, at just 28 years old, welcomed 7 baby boys into the world in a single night. What began as a miracle quickly turned into an incredible journey of love, sacrifice, and survival. 7 tiny, identical boys were born to one man, each of them demanding his care, attention, and unconditional love. Raising one child is a challenge, but 7? The odds were unimaginable. For 37 years, this father has watched his boys grow, each one developing their own unique dreams, ambitions, and struggles. But the story does not end there. The question remains, how have they turned out after nearly 4 decades? What became of those 7 baby boys? Stay with us, because what you are about to hear is a tale of resilience, transformation, and the extraordinary power of family that you will not want to miss. It was a night like no other in 1987. The quiet hum of the hospital seemed ordinary, but inside one delivery room, the extraordinary was unfolding. A young father, just 28 years old, sat nervously beside his wife, waiting for the birth of their first child. He had been told to expect one baby, a girl, he thought, but life had a far more remarkable plan in store. As the minutes ticked by, the doctors and nurses worked swiftly, their faces pale with confusion. The first cry pierced the air, and then another. And another. 7 times in total, a sound that no one in the room had expected. His heart raced as he sat frozen in disbelief, staring at the tiny miracles in front of him. 7 babies. His mind struggled to comprehend the scene before him. Doctors, normally composed in the face of the unknown, exchanged nervous glances as they moved to care for each newborn. He could hardly breathe as they rushed to stabilize the tiny bodies, their cries echoing through the room. The nurses, too, were taken aback by the sheer rarity of what had just occurred. Rare, yes. Unlikely, even more so. The father was no stranger to the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for the moment he was witnessing. Each of his sons, born one by one, lay side by side, their tiny faces wrinkled and fragile, yet each one alive, breathing, and making his presence known to the world. The father could not help but feel a mix of awe and panic. 7 babies meant 7 lives to care for, 7 times the responsibility, 7 times the need for attention. He had come into this moment expecting a single child, but now, the world had handed him a challenge beyond any he could have imagined. How could one man care for 7 newborns? How could his wife, recovering from the grueling birth, handle such a monumental task? As the initial shock wore off, the father found himself thrust into the most overwhelming of roles. The first few days were a blur of exhaustion, as he and his wife struggled to manage the endless demands of 7 infants. He learned quickly how to change diapers, warm bottles, and hold each baby without feeling like he was losing himself. But the emotional toll was immense. He was constantly on edge, knowing that any misstep could mean trouble for his fragile sons. The sleepless nights were the hardest. His mind raced with thoughts of how he could possibly give each baby the attention they needed while still managing to care for his wife. He found himself awake at all hours, feeding and comforting each child, trying to manage the chaos that had consumed their home. The house, once quiet and neat, was now filled with the sounds of baby cries and the soft rustle of blankets. He had never known such exhaustion. And yet, despite the overwhelming fatigue, there was an undeniable sense of love that fueled him. His sons were his world now. His every thought was about their well-being, and he could not imagine life without them. In the quiet moments, when all 7 were asleep, he would sit by their cribs and simply watch them, overwhelmed with the realization that these tiny, helpless beings were his responsibility. He had no choice but to rise to the occasion. There was no manual for this. No guidebook for raising 7 babies at once. He had to adapt quickly, learning how to balance the needs of each child with his own physical and emotional limits. The struggles were constant, but there was a deep, unwavering sense of duty that kept him going. The community's reaction to the birth was one of awe and disbelief. Word spread quickly, and soon, people from all over town were coming to visit, offering their congratulations, or in some cases, their skepticism. How could one man handle so much responsibility? Was it even possible for him to raise 7 children at once? Despite the admiration, there were also whispers. Some doubted the father's ability to raise 7 boys on his own. Others suggested that it was too much for one person. And there were those who questioned whether he should have given some of the children up for adoption. But for the father, there was no question. He could never abandon his sons. They were his purpose now, and he would fight every day to make sure they grew up with love, support, and everything they needed. Handling these external pressures was no easy task. Every time he stepped out into the community, he felt the weight of the doubts on his shoulders. But he didn't let it sway him. With each visit, he became more determined to prove that he could do it. He would raise these 7 boys with all the love he had to give, no matter what anyone else thought. The father's strength, though often hidden behind the exhaustion, was what kept him moving forward. He may have been overwhelmed, but he was not defeated. And as the years passed, the community's doubts would give way to respect. The miracle of 7 boys, raised by one father, would become a story of resilience, love, and the enduring power of family. As the years passed, the father watched his 7 sons slowly transform from fragile infants into energetic toddlers and finally into teenagers, each with their own unique qualities. Despite the fact that they had been born on the same night, each boy developed his own personality and traits that made him distinctly different from the others. What once seemed like 7 identical babies now turned into 7 individuals with hopes, dreams, and aspirations of their own. Ethan, the oldest and most responsible, had always been the natural leader. Even as a child, he was determined, assertive, and eager to guide his brothers through any challenge they faced. From organizing games in the backyard to being the first to speak up when something needed to be done, Ethan always took charge. His leadership skills were apparent from the moment he could walk, and by the time he hit his teenage years, he was seen as the figurehead of the group. But his leadership was not without its struggles. As the other boys grew, they began to question Ethan's authority. They didn't always agree with him, and Ethan had to learn to manage his own frustration as his brothers became more independent. Caleb, on the other hand, was the more introspective one. Quiet, thoughtful, and sometimes distant, Caleb was often lost in his own world. Whether it was drawing, painting, or simply daydreaming, he had a deep connection to his inner self. While his brothers were busy playing sports or engaging in competitive activities, Caleb found solace in the world of art and creativity. But his quiet nature sometimes made it hard for the family to understand him. The father, ever supportive, tried his best to connect with Caleb, but there were times when Caleb's passion for art seemed to separate him from the family. As Caleb entered his teenage years, he often withdrew, seeking refuge in his room with his sketchpad or his paintbrushes. His father respected his space but always tried to encourage him to share his passions, and slowly, Caleb began to open up more. Isaac, the athlete, was the third born and as energetic as they come. From a young age, he had been obsessed with sports. Whether it was soccer, basketball, or any game with a ball, Isaac's competitive spirit was evident. He would spend hours practicing on his own, determined to be the best. His athleticism was something the family came to admire, but his intense focus on his training also created a divide between him and his brothers. His commitment to sports meant he often missed out on family gatherings and outings. He was driven by the desire to win, to be the best, but that determination sometimes overshadowed the importance of spending time together as a family. This caused some tension between him and the other boys, especially when they felt like Isaac was always too busy for them. Jacob, the fourth son, was the curious one, always tinkering with gadgets, taking things apart just to understand how they worked. His room was a collection of half-finished projects, broken electronics, old radios, and piles of circuit boards. Unlike Isaac, whose focus was on physical achievements, Jacob's world was one of intellectual discovery. He loved learning, experimenting, and building things. There were times when his family found his passion for machines and electronics a little overwhelming, especially when he was constantly asking for tools or parts to fix things around the house. But his curiosity also made him the go-to person whenever something in the house broke. The father was proud of his son's ingenuity, though he sometimes wished Jacob would spend less time on his projects and more time with the family. Noah, the fifth born, was the joker. With a constant smile on his face, he was the life of the party. His laugh was infectious, and he had a knack for making everyone around him smile. No matter what was going on in the house, Noah could always lighten the mood with a well-timed joke or a funny face. He was the one who kept the atmosphere from getting too heavy, especially when the challenges of raising 7 boys began to weigh on the father. But Noah's humor sometimes masked deeper insecurities. As he entered his teenage years, he began to struggle with fitting in. Despite his outgoing personality, he often felt like he wasn't living up to the expectations placed on him. He wanted to be as successful as his brothers, but he struggled to find his own path. His father noticed this and made sure to spend extra time with Noah, reminding him that being himself was more than enough. Luke, the second youngest, was the more reflective and intellectual one. He often sat quietly in the corner, contemplating the world around him. Unlike his brothers, Luke wasn't particularly interested in sports, technology, or art. He had a deep love for reading and philosophy. He would often spend hours reading books, trying to understand the bigger picture of life. He asked questions about the world that his brothers didn't always have answers to, and this sometimes left him feeling disconnected from the rest of the family. But his father admired Luke's thoughtful nature. He encouraged him to continue asking questions and seeking knowledge, and as Luke grew older, he became more comfortable in his own skin. Though he often felt different from the others, he began to realize that his deep thoughts and reflections were a valuable part of who he was. Finally, Levi, the youngest, had an intense drive. Even as a young boy, he exhibited a fierce determination that was unmatched by his brothers. He wasn't content to simply go along with the flow. Levi wanted to make his own mark in the world. This made him a bit of a rebel. He often clashed with his father, especially when it came to following the rules. Levi wanted to do things his own way, even if it meant challenging his father's authority. The father was firm but patient with Levi, recognizing that his rebellious nature was a sign of the strong-willed man he would become. Levi's journey through his teenage years was full of ups and downs, but his father never gave up on him, always offering a guiding hand when Levi was ready to listen. As the boys entered their teenage years, the once strong bond between father and sons began to loosen. The independence that was beginning to form in each of them brought with it inevitable conflict. They no longer needed him in the same way they had when they were children. They wanted freedom, autonomy, and space to make their own decisions. The father, who had always been their protector and provider, suddenly felt like an outsider in his own home. Isaac's intense focus on sports led him to spend more time training and less time with his family, which caused tension between him and the others. Caleb, the artist, spent hours in his room, becoming more reclusive and distant. Even the once close bond with Noah, the joker, began to fade as Noah struggled with his own insecurities. Ethan, the oldest, now found himself constantly at odds with his brothers, trying to maintain order while they sought their own identities. But it wasn't just the boys who were changing. The father had to adjust to the fact that his children were no longer dependent on him in the same way. His role as their caretaker and protector was slowly being replaced by a new dynamic. He struggled to navigate the transition from being the provider to becoming more of a mentor and advisor. Despite these challenges, the father remained steadfast. He knew this was part of growing up, and though it was difficult to accept, he understood that the boys needed space to find their own way. But deep down, he feared that the closer they got to adulthood, the further they would drift from him. As the boys reached adulthood, they began to carve their own paths. Their childhood, filled with shared experiences and the guiding hand of their father, was now just the foundation for their individual journeys. Each of the 7 sons had grown into his own person, driven by unique dreams and aspirations. The father had watched, with immense pride, as each son pursued his own way, but he could not help but notice the subtle changes in the family dynamic. The days of them all relying on him as their single point of support were gone, and yet he never stopped being there for them. Ethan, the oldest, had always been the natural leader. Even as a child, he was the one who kept the others in line, often acting as a second father to his younger brothers. When he reached adulthood, Ethan decided to pursue law. It was a field that demanded leadership, authority, and the ability to guide others, all qualities that Ethan had in abundance. He enrolled in a prestigious law school, quickly rising to the top of his class. His father supported him every step of the way, but there were moments when Ethan found himself distanced from his family. Law was grueling, and the pressure to succeed was constant. As the years passed, his work consumed more and more of his time, leaving little for family. His father, while proud of Ethan's accomplishments, could see the strain that the work was putting on him. Ethan had become so focused on his career that he began to lose touch with the very family that had shaped him. Though the distance between them grew, the father never stopped reaching out. He would send Ethan messages of encouragement, reminding him to take breaks, to call home, and to cherish the moments that mattered most. Ethan appreciated it, though he often felt like he could never live up to his father's expectations. There were times when he missed the simpler days, when family dinners were the center of life and his biggest challenge was making sure the younger brothers didn't get into trouble. Caleb, the second oldest, had always been the quiet one. He was the artist, the dreamer, the one who seemed to exist in a world of his own. Growing up, he had often retreated to his room, drawing and painting, lost in a world of colors and shapes. As he entered adulthood, Caleb chose to follow his passion for art, enrolling in an art school in Europe. Unlike his brothers, who had embraced more conventional paths, Caleb sought to explore and experience the world in a way that was true to himself. The father, though supportive, could not always understand Caleb's need for solitude. He wanted his son to succeed, of course, but he also wanted him to feel grounded in the family, to return home and share his successes with them. Caleb, however, had always felt that his path was different, and for the first time in his life, he struggled to reconcile his desire for artistic freedom with his father's hopes for him to achieve stability and success. During his time in Europe, Caleb faced numerous hardships. His art wasn't always well received, and there were moments of doubt when he questioned whether he had chosen the right path. Yet, through it all, his father remained a constant source of support. The father would call Caleb often, not to offer advice, but simply to listen. He would remind Caleb that his art was a gift, one that the world needed, and that no matter how difficult things seemed, he had the talent to push through. Caleb found comfort in his father's unwavering belief in him. Isaac, the third son, had always been the athlete of the group. His competitive spirit was unmatched, and from a young age, he knew that sports would define his future. He was quick to excel in anything that required speed, strength, and coordination, and by the time he was in high school, he had already earned a scholarship to a prestigious university. Isaac's dream was to play professional soccer, and he worked tirelessly toward that goal, pushing his body to its limits in pursuit of a dream that seemed just within his reach. The father was immensely proud of Isaac's work ethic, but he also worried. He had seen how easily sports careers could end, how quickly an injury could derail everything. Isaac's single-minded focus on soccer made him less attentive to the people around him, and at times, the father wondered whether Isaac would be able to find happiness outside of the game. Isaac's career did take off, and he played for a professional team for several years, but the inevitable happened. A severe knee injury forced him to retire early from the sport he loved. For the first time in his life, Isaac was faced with a future that didn't involve soccer. The sudden shift left him feeling lost. His identity had been tied to the game for so long, and now he had to find a new purpose. The father, though relieved that Isaac was no longer under the constant physical strain of professional sports, knew that this was a turning point. He stepped in with his usual calm and wisdom, reminding Isaac that his worth was not tied to any one achievement. Isaac found new purpose as a coach, using the lessons he had learned to guide younger athletes. But the transition wasn't easy, and there were moments when Isaac struggled to reconcile his past with his present. Jacob, the fourth son, had always been the tinkerer. From a young age, he had a knack for taking things apart and putting them back together, often improving upon the original design. By the time he was an adult, Jacob had developed a fascination with technology, leading him to pursue a degree in engineering. His natural talent and curiosity led him to found a tech startup, and soon, his innovations were making waves in the industry. But success came with its own set of challenges. Jacob felt the pressure to constantly innovate, to stay ahead of the curve. There were times when he felt isolated, consumed by the demands of the tech world. Despite his growing success, he struggled with feelings of inadequacy, as though no matter how far he came, it was never enough. Through it all, his father remained a constant source of strength. Jacob would often call him in the middle of a stressful day, seeking advice or simply wanting to hear his father's calm voice. The father's support never wavered, reminding Jacob that his value was not defined by his success but by his character and the way he treated others. Noah, the fifth son, had always been the comedian, the one who could make anyone laugh, even in the most difficult of circumstances. As he entered adulthood, he pursued stand-up comedy, using humor to connect with people and to make light of life struggles. But the path wasn't as easy as Noah had hoped. He faced years of rejection, failed auditions, and moments of self-doubt. He often questioned whether comedy was the right choice for him, and he struggled to find his place in the world. His father, though always supportive, could see that Noah's humor was masking deeper insecurities. The father encouraged Noah to embrace his talents but reminded him that it was okay to ask for help when things got tough. It was this unwavering support that helped Noah finally find his place as a writer for a popular TV show, where he was able to use his humor to touch people's lives in a new way. Luke, the sixth son, had always been the philosopher, the thinker. He spent his days reading and questioning the world around him, always seeking to understand the bigger picture. As an adult, Luke pursued a career in academia, becoming a respected philosophy professor. But his intellectual pursuits often left him feeling disconnected from the rest of the family. The father, understanding Luke's need for solitude, always reminded him that the family was there for him, even if he felt lost in his academic world. Luke, over time, found balance, learning that his knowledge could be used to guide others, especially his brothers. Finally, Levi, the youngest, had always been driven. His determination was unmatched, and by the time he was in college, he knew he wanted to be a doctor. Levi's relentless work ethic earned him a spot in medical school, but the pressures of studying medicine took a toll on him. For the first time, Levi felt overwhelmed. The father, ever the support, stepped in, reminding Levi that it was okay to take a step back, to ask for help, and to take care of himself. Levi eventually became a respected surgeon, but he never forgot the lessons his father had taught him about balancing ambition with self-care. Throughout their adult years, the father never stopped being there for his sons. Though they had each forged their own path, they continued to lean on him, to turn to him for wisdom, and to seek his approval. The father was proud of each of them, not for what they had accomplished, but for the men they had become. The sacrifices he had made in the early years, the sleepless nights, the emotional struggles, had all been worth it. He had raised 7 sons who, though different in many ways, shared the same values of hard work, determination, and family. And as the boys grew older, the father found peace in knowing that he had given them everything he could. He no longer had to be their caretaker, but he remained their guide, their mentor, and their rock. He watched them navigate their lives, offering advice when asked, but never forcing his opinions on them. His support was constant, but it was now their time to lead their own lives. And though the father missed the days when his boys were all at home, he found joy in seeing them thrive. Their successes were his successes, their struggles his struggles, and in the end, the father knew that his love for them was the greatest gift he had ever given. Time, as it always does, kept moving forward. The 7 brothers had grown into men with their own lives, their own families, and their own careers. The once bustling home, filled with the sounds of laughter, arguments, and the daily chaos of raising 7 boys, had quieted down as the years passed. The father had grown older, and his health, once strong and unwavering, began to show signs of wear. It started as a series of small moments, feeling winded after climbing a flight of stairs, a slight pain in his chest that he tried to ignore, the overwhelming tiredness that never seemed to go away. His sons noticed the changes but didn't fully grasp the weight of what was happening until one afternoon, when the father collapsed at home. He had been working in his garage, organizing some old tools, when his body gave out. The call went out to all 7 boys. Their father was in the hospital, and they needed to come together. The boys, who had scattered to the corners of the world, each rushed back home. The years of distance, the growing pains, the misunderstandings, all of that faded in an instant when they received the news. They knew the time had come to be there for their father, just as he had always been there for them. As they gathered around the hospital bed, there was an undeniable sense of unity. They were no longer the little boys who had needed their father to teach them how to tie their shoes or make their school lunches. They were men, each with their own families and responsibilities. And yet, when they came together, they were reminded of the bond they shared. A bond that had been forged in the hardest of times, a bond that had never truly broken. The father lay in the hospital bed, his face pale, his breathing shallow. But when he saw his sons enter the room, a slow smile spread across his face. He had always been their rock, their protector, the one they could rely on. But now, it was their turn to take care of him. As the boys surrounded him, they could see how much he had aged, how fragile he had become. For the first time, they saw him not as the father who had raised them with strength and wisdom, but as the man who had grown weary from a lifetime of sacrifice. Each son took a moment to sit by his side, to hold his hand, to offer their silent support. They knew he had always been there for them, but now, they had to be there for him. It was a humbling moment for them all. Ethan, the oldest, sat beside his father and squeezed his hand. He had always been the one who tried to shoulder the weight of the world, to lead the others. But now, he felt the full weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. "We are here, Dad," he said softly, his voice cracking with emotion. "We've got this. We'll take care of you." The other brothers gathered around, each in his own way trying to come to terms with the reality of their father's declining health. Caleb, the artist, who had often been the quiet one, leaned over and whispered to his father, "You've always been our foundation. We are who we are because of you. We'll make sure you're never alone." Isaac, the former athlete, tried to hold back tears, his tough exterior cracking. "You've been our coach in life, Dad. Now it's our turn to help you through this." Jacob, the tech-savvy son, sat at the edge of the bed, adjusting the monitors, making sure everything was in order. He may not have always shown his emotions, but his care and attention to detail were his way of showing love. Noah, the joker, tried to lighten the mood. He told a funny story about their childhood, trying to make his father smile. "You remember that time you had to chase us around the yard because we swapped all your tools around? You never caught me, but I bet you can still beat me in a race now." The father's smile was faint, but it was there. He had always been the one who made them feel safe, who taught them that strength was found in love and family. Now, it was their turn to return that love. The hospital room, once filled with the sterile scent of antiseptic, was now filled with the warmth of family. They shared stories, laughter, and silence as they waited together. It was as though time had reversed. They were no longer grown men, but the same little boys who had once looked up to their father with wide eyes, full of admiration and love. And now, they saw him as the man who had shaped their lives in ways they could never fully understand, until now. In the quiet moments, the father's thoughts wandered back to the years he had spent raising them, the struggles he had faced, and the sacrifices he had made. He never once regretted the decision to raise his sons with all his heart. He had given everything to them, and now, as he lay in that hospital bed, he felt at peace knowing that they had become the men he had hoped they would be. As the night wore on, one by one, the boys took turns leaving the room to catch their breath or to speak with their own families. But the father was never alone. One of them was always by his side. In this moment of vulnerability, the father realized something profound. The love he had given them, the strength he had shared, had come full circle. They were no longer just his children. They were his support, his strength, his legacy. As the weeks passed and the father's health continued to decline, his sons remained by his side, each of them reflecting on the life he had given them and the lessons he had instilled. It was a bittersweet time for the family. The hospital visits became routine, and while they tried to hold on to the hope that their father might recover, deep down they knew that the end was drawing near. Yet, through it all, they found solace in the knowledge that their father had lived a life of purpose, and his legacy was woven into every part of their lives. The father had given them everything: his time, his love, his sacrifices. But it was not just his actions that defined him. It was the way he made them feel. He had taught them that love was not measured by grand gestures but by the everyday acts of kindness, patience, and understanding. He had been their rock, the one who had always been there to catch them when they fell, the one who had shown them what it meant to be truly selfless. As the father lay in his bed, surrounded by his sons, they took turns sitting with him, talking about old memories, sharing stories, and laughing at jokes from their childhood. The father smiled, but it was clear that his body was growing tired. His sons knew that this time was precious, and they savored every moment they had left with him. They had all come so far, yet they knew that nothing would ever replace the foundation he had built for them. The father's mind drifted back to the early days of their lives, the sleepless nights, the struggles, the sacrifices. He remembered how, at first, he had felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising 7 boys. He had wondered if he was up to the challenge, but he had never once thought about giving up. Every day had been a lesson in perseverance, love, and family. Now, as he neared the end of his life, he realized that every sacrifice had been worth it. The father had always known that his time on earth was finite, but what mattered most to him was that he had lived a life that made a difference in the lives of his sons. He had given them everything he had, and in return, they had grown into strong, independent men. They had their own lives now, their own families, but they would never forget the lessons he had taught them. As he mentored young engineers, he made sure to emphasize the importance of hard work, integrity, and balance, values that his father had instilled in him. Jacob's legacy was one of innovation, but also of compassion. Noah, the comedian, had found his place as a writer, blending humor with life's more serious moments. He had learned to embrace his vulnerability and use his humor to connect with others. His father's unwavering support had given him the confidence to pursue his passion for comedy, and now, Noah used his platform to share the lessons of love, family, and resilience that his father had taught him. His humor was a gift, but it was also a means of healing, and he knew that his father's influence would live on through his work. Luke, the philosopher and professor, had found peace in his intellectual pursuits. His father's lessons on the importance of family and balance had helped him understand that knowledge was not just about facts and theories, but about understanding the human experience. As a professor, Luke often shared the stories of his father's unwavering love and sacrifice, using those stories to teach his students about the importance of empathy, wisdom, and family. Levi, the youngest, had become a respected surgeon. He carried the same determination and drive that had defined his youth into his medical career. But it was his father's teachings about self-care, balance, and the importance of family that had shaped his approach to medicine. Levi often found himself reflecting on his father's wisdom, especially when he found himself overwhelmed by the pressures of his career. His father's legacy had taught him that no matter how demanding life could be, family and love always came first. The father's legacy was one of sacrifice, love, and unwavering commitment to family. He had raised 7 boys, each one different, each one unique, but all of them shaped by his influence. As his sons carried on with their lives, they carried with them the lessons he had taught them, the importance of hard work, the power of love, and the unbreakable bond of family. The father's life was not defined by grand achievements or accolades. It was defined by the quiet, everyday moments, the sleepless nights, the long hours spent working to provide for his children, the sacrifices made without hesitation. He had given everything he had to his sons, and in return, they had become the men he had always hoped they would be. As they gathered for his funeral, they shared stories, laughter, and tears. Each son had his own memories of their father, but they all shared one common truth: his love had shaped them into the people they were. The father's legacy would live on through them, in the lives they built, in the families they raised, and in the lessons they passed down to the next generation. And as they stood together, remembering the man who had given them everything, they knew that his love would never fade. It would live on, a beacon for all of them to follow, guiding them through the challenges of life, just as their father had done for them. Several years passed after the father's death, and his sons carried on with their lives, forever changed by the love and wisdom he had given them. But every year, without fail, they gathered on the anniversary of his passing, an unspoken tradition. It was a time of remembrance, a moment to reflect on everything he had instilled in them, and to ensure that his spirit continued to guide them through their own lives. As the years passed, the brothers each had children of their own, and their families began to grow. They spoke often of their father, sharing stories with their own children, teaching them the lessons they had learned. It became a ritual for each son to tell his children about the man who had raised them. They would speak of the quiet strength he had shown, the sacrifices he made, and the unwavering love he gave, no matter the cost. Ethan, now with a family of his own, often took a moment to reflect on the lessons his father had taught him about leadership. As he watched his own children grow, he realized just how much his father's example had shaped his approach to fatherhood. Ethan now understood that leadership wasn't just about authority. It was about sacrifice, patience, and being present. He had learned that from the very man who had led him and his brothers with such quiet grace. Caleb, the artist, was now running his own gallery and living a life filled with creativity. He often thought back to the times when he had felt distant from the family, lost in his own world of painting. But it was his father's quiet encouragement that had allowed him to continue on that path. Caleb made sure to instill the same belief in his children, showing them that creativity wasn't just about the work itself, it was about staying true to oneself. It was a lesson his father had taught him and one he passed down to the next generation. Isaac, now a coach for young athletes, often found himself reflecting on his father's impact on his life. He had learned from his father that success wasn't just about winning, it was about resilience, teamwork, and showing up every day. His own coaching philosophy was rooted in the values his father had instilled in him. Isaac made sure to teach his players the importance of hard work, dedication, and integrity, passing on the very same lessons he had learned as a child. Jacob, now running his own tech company, thought about his father's humility, even in the face of success. The father had never sought recognition or accolades. He had simply worked hard and loved deeply. Jacob applied that same humility in his own business, choosing to lead with compassion and integrity rather than focusing solely on the bottom line. His father's legacy was woven into everything he did, and Jacob took great pride in carrying that legacy forward. Noah, the comedian, had become a household name in the entertainment world. His humor had touched millions of people, but he never forgot the roots from which it came. He would often reflect on his father's quiet strength and the way he had kept the family together, even in the toughest of times. Now, when Noah performed on stage, he made sure to incorporate the life lessons he had learned from his father, about love, family, and the importance of finding humor in even the darkest moments. Luke, the philosopher, now a professor, continued to share his father's wisdom with his students. He often used his father's life as a real-life example of the importance of love, sacrifice, and the bonds that hold us together. Luke's students admired his ability to bring abstract philosophical ideas down to earth, and Luke always made sure to credit his father as the greatest teacher he had ever had. Levi, the surgeon, had become known for his compassion and dedication to his patients. He often remembered the times when his father had taught him the importance of balance, not just in his career but in his life. Levi knew that his father's lessons on taking care of oneself and loving deeply had made him the person he was today. As the years continued to pass, the sons would meet, often at their childhood home, to celebrate their father's life and legacy. It was no longer a sad occasion but one of joy, remembering the good times and the lessons their father had passed on to them. His absence was deeply felt, but the presence of his influence was never in question. They laughed together, shared stories, and remembered their father with a deep sense of gratitude. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, both individually and as a family, and how, through it all, their father's wisdom had helped them navigate even the toughest times. His legacy lived on, not just in the memories they held, but in the lives they were now living, lives that had been shaped by his quiet strength and unwavering love. Each year, they would end the day by lighting a candle in his honor and gathering together in a circle, just as they had when they were children. They knew that their father's spirit lived on in each of them, and they carried his lessons with them every day. The family had come full circle. The man who had raised them with love and sacrifice had left behind a legacy of wisdom, strength, and compassion, one that would continue to impact generations to come. As they sat together, reflecting on the man they had all loved and admired, they understood the true power of his legacy. It was not just in the things he had done for them, but in the way he had loved them, guided them, and taught them to love and guide others. Their father had taught them that family was everything, and as long as they held on to each other, his legacy would never fade. The 7 sons, now grown with families of their own, continued to honor their father's memory and the legacy he had left behind. Each year, as they gathered together, they not only celebrated the life of the man who had shaped them but also passed on his teachings to their children. His influence could be seen in the way they raised their families, the way they approached life's challenges, and the way they remained united, no matter what. The father's life had been simple, but his impact was profound. He had been a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. His love had been his greatest gift, and in the end, it was his love that would continue to shape generations long after he was gone. And so, as the 7 sons stood together, surrounded by their own families, they knew that their father's love was eternal. It would never fade, never be forgotten, because it lived on in every life he had touched, and in the family he had created.